Life was good. Better than good, honestly. I owned a successful construction company that I built from scratch. My wife, Vicky, and I seemed to have it all: a big house, two nice cars, and the kind of love story people envied. We grew up together, both of us working shifts at my family's diner as teenagers. Back then, life was simpler, and so were we. Vicky had always been ambitious. She worked her way up from a compliance officer to a high-ranking position at a big firm, which meant frequent travel. I supported her despite the nagging insecurities I carried from my past. My dad cheated on my mom, and that kind of thing leaves scars, even if you don't want to admit it. But I trusted Vicky. She was my partner, my rock. Then Jasmine walked into my life. She was a new client looking to remodel her home. Not because of her, but because of what I saw there. On her mantle was a photo of her husband, Steve, and my wife, Vicky. The picture was from last summer, a time when Vicky claimed she was on a work trip. In the photo, they were smiling at some resort, Steve's arm casually draped around Vicky's shoulders. I froze. Jasmine must have noticed because she asked if I was okay. I played it off, but my mind was spinning. Why was my wife in a photo with her husband? Why hadn't she mentioned it? Later that evening, I confronted Vicky. "Hey, do you know a guy named Steve?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Her reaction was instant. She hesitated. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she said, "Steve? No, doesn't ring a bell." What? That's when I knew something was wrong. Vicky never hesitated. She was sharp, quick with her answers. That split-second pause planted a seed of doubt I couldn't shake. I reached out to Jasmine the next day under the guise of discussing her remodel. Casually, I brought up the photo. "That picture on your mantle, the one with your husband and a bunch of people. Where was it taken?" I asked. Jasmine frowned. "Oh, you mean the one at the resort? That was in Cancun last July." "What?" I forced a smile. It looked like a fun trip. It all lined up. Last July, Vicky was supposed to be at a conference in Atlanta. Except now I knew she wasn't. That night, as Vicky packed for another business trip, I decided to take action. I reached out to Jasmine again, and together we hired a private investigator. If Vicky was lying, I needed to know the truth. What I found would unravel everything. I thought I knew about my wife and the life we built together. The private investigator, Mike, was discreet and professional. When Jasmine and I explained the situation, he nodded like this was just another Tuesday for him. "Give me a couple of weeks," he said. "I'll dig into their travel records, phone logs, and anything else that pops up." Jasmine and I exchanged a look. Weeks felt like an eternity, but we agreed to wait. Meanwhile, life at home became unbearable. Vicky acted normal, too normal. She had that effortless charm she always carried, but now every smile, every laugh felt rehearsed. When she kissed me goodbye before her trip, it felt hollow, like a ghost of the love we used to share. I watched her drive off, a pit forming in my stomach. That night, I called my best friend Carl. He's the guy I always leaned on for advice, the one who'd been my best man at our wedding. I didn't go into detail, just told him I had a feeling something wasn't right with Vicky. "You think she's cheating?" Carl asked bluntly, his tone matter of fact. "I don't know, man," I replied, pacing the living room. But I saw this picture and her reaction when I asked about it. It didn't sit right. Carl sighed. "Look, don't jump to conclusions. But if you're already feeling like this, there's probably a reason." I wanted him to tell me I was overthinking it, that it was all in my head. But he didn't. And deep down, I appreciated his honesty. The days crawled by. I threw myself into work, hammering out contracts and overseeing projects, just to keep my mind busy. Jasmine, on the other hand, seemed more composed than me. She texted updates now and then, like, "Any word from Mike?" Or "How's everything on your end?" It was strange finding comfort in someone I barely knew. But we were in this together now. A week later, Mike called. "Don, we need to meet. I've got something." My heart sank. If he'd found nothing, he would have just said so over the phone. Meeting in person meant it wasn't good. We met at a coffee shop, and Jasmine was already there when I arrived. Her face was tense, her usual calm demeanor cracking just a bit. Mike didn't waste time. He slid a manila folder across the table. "Here's what I've got so far: hotel bookings, flight records, and surveillance photos. It's not everything, but it paints a pretty clear picture." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were flight itineraries showing Vicky and Steve booked on the same flights, destinations that didn't match her work trips. Photos of them walking into hotels together, arm in arm. My stomach turned as I flipped through the evidence. Jasmine was staring at the same folder, her hands gripping the edge of the table. 6 years, she said quietly. That's how long we've been married. And this has been going on for almost that long. 6 years. It hit me like a sledgehammer. Vicky and I had celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary last spring. For more than half of our marriage, she'd been living a double life. I looked at Mike, barely able to speak. How? How did they get away with it for so long? I asked. They were careful, he said. They only met in distant cities, booked separate rooms, and communicated through burner phones. Honestly, if it weren't for that photo you probably never would have found out. Jasmine closed the folder and leaned back, her expression hardening. So what's next? She asked. I couldn't even think that far ahead. My whole world had just been turned upside down. I don't know, I admitted. But I can't let this slide. Mike nodded. I'll keep digging. If you want a smoking gun, something you can take to court, I'll find it. As we left the coffee shop, Jasmine stopped me. Dawn, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I know this is hell for you, but at least we're not going through it alone. For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of relief. She was right. I wasn't alone. Mike's call came a week later, and this time it wasn't just evidence. He'd recorded a conversation between Vicky and Steve. You're going to want to hear this, he told me. Jasmine was on the line too, and we decided to meet at her place to listen together. I sat on her couch, gripping the edge of the cushion, while Mike set up his laptop. Jasmine handed me a glass of water, but my hands were too shaky to hold it steady. Let's get this over with, I muttered. The recording started, and there was Vicky's voice, familiar, yet suddenly foreign. I can't believe we've kept this up for 6 years, she said, laughing softly. Steve chuckled in response. We're good at this. The secret rendezvous, the burner phones. It's kind of thrilling, isn't it? My jaw tightened as Vicky replied. That's why I did it. Not because I wanted to be with you, but because I wanted to prove to myself, and to Dawn, that I could. My heart stopped. Jasmine's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. What the hell does that even mean? She whispered. Steve sounded just as confused. What are you talking about? Vicky sighed. You remember that argument Dawn and I had years ago? He told me I wasn't capable of doing anything behind his back because he'd always find out. It just stuck with me. I wanted to see if I could prove him wrong. And I did. The room fell silent except for the sound of the recording. So this was all some kind of game to you? Steve asked, his tone incredulous. It wasn't about you, Vicky snapped. It was about me, about control. I needed to feel like I had the upper hand, even if he never knew about it. I couldn't listen anymore. I slammed the laptop shut and stood up, pacing the room. 6 years, I said, my voice trembling with anger. 6 years of lies, of betrayal, all because of some stupid argument. Jasmine stood too, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. And Steve, my husband, he just went along with it like it was no big deal. Like it didn't matter that he was destroying 2 families. I couldn't sit still, my fists clenched at my sides. I had to fight the urge to punch the wall. Jasmine put a hand on my arm, grounding me. Dawn, she said softly, we'll get through this. Together. I nodded, but the weight of it all was crushing. 6 years. 6 years of my life built on a lie. What happened next? Well, that's a story for another video. But for now, I'll leave you with this. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it's nearly impossible to repair. And sometimes the people you think you know the best are the ones who can hurt you the most. Thanks for watching. If you've been through something similar, or if this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories like this. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.